Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Tully, a senior writing coach at Defend and Publish, and welcome to episode 15, Smart Binge Writing. I'm focusing on binge writing this week because this is a topic that tends to come up at this time of year. It's April, and so we're nearing the end of the semester. Many projects and things are due. So if you're a graduate student, you might be trying to get to a dissertation defense and finish those last couple of edits or chapters. If you're a faculty member, you might be trying to knock out some last pieces of articles or books prior to the summer starting. And so one of the things that tends to happen, it can happen at all times of year, but people I would argue are a little bit more likely to binge at this point of year because you're just trying to get some extra work done. And so even with folks that have set writing schedules and solid writing habits, and I would argue that I feel that I have those where I'm writing regularly, I don't get writer's block. I'm trying to work through some of those habits, and that's why I like to do these podcasts on faculty productivity. But even I have had to do a writing binge this semester, and it was one of those things where I had a couple deadlines creep up on me all at the same time, and I did need to pull an all-nighter, which I hadn't done in a long time, and I definitely don't have the same amount of stamina for, but I did have to do it. And so binges could really they might take a couple of different shapes. A common one is doing like an all day writing binge on like a Saturday or Sunday. For those of you that are parents, maybe you're able to snag some childcare, and so you're just trying to get it all done when you're able to do it. Or graduate students or instructors, you might be trying to get some writing done on the weekend when you're not teaching. It could also take the form of an all-nighter, as I mentioned, or even something where you're just trying to go to work on, say, a Monday, and you're just going to try to write for 8 hours on that Monday, or that's your writing day. So I would argue if you're going to do it, there are some strategies that you can do to make that time work more efficiently. A lot of the research on binging does show that you just don't get quite as much done because you'll say something to yourself like, I have 8 hours, I have this whole long day ahead of me. I might as well just, stretch and take lots of breaks and do all this stuff that kind of eats up your time. And it's very deceiving because it seems like if your time is 8 hours, you're getting 8 hours of writing done, but that's not what really happens. You might only get 5 good hours of writing done. So there's a couple things that I've found over the years that work for setting up a writing day. I try to actually avoid the word binge. Like if I just say, well, today's going to be a whole day of writing, I need to do these things. There are some strategies that you can do. So let me throw some things out to you. The first one that I think is really important to do is to just pick one project to work on if at all possible. There are some people that will use a writing day or a binge, if you want to call it that, to catch up on lots of things. And if you're trying to do that, we're trying to scramble to write a conference proposal and a chapter and something else at the same time. I would argue your energy is not as focused and you're just not getting as much done because you're mentally trying to shift between projects. So I would argue maybe rule number one is figure out what is the thing you're going to work on and try to make as much progress as possible. So graduate students, that might be, it might be your dissertation, but it might even be, if you have to get more narrow than that, maybe it's completing chapter 4 today. That's what it is that you're going to do. For articles, it might be trying to get through, a final read through of all those, 25 pages of an article to see what you need to have and complete. So one project is a good one. Another thing that I think is really helpful to do is to make a list of everything that you want to get accomplished before the day of the binge. So a day or two before, make a list of those very specific tasks that you need to accomplish. And those might be things very specific, like make sure that a certain reference is correct all the way through, or make sure your formatting is correct. It could be like checking your table titles for consistency, but it also can include things like rewriting the first 2 paragraphs in a certain chapter. It could be adding 2 more sources to your literature review and working those discussions of sources in. It could be writing a rationale for your methodology in an article or in a chapter. So, I would make that list of specific tasks as soon as you can before the binge. So that way you've got a list of very concrete things that you're going to work on. One of the mistakes that I've made over the years when I try to have a writing day is I don't even think about what I'm going to work on until I get to the writing day. And then of course, as with all of us, we sit there and we think, what am I going to do? And then you take the time to figure that out. That's time you actually could be spent writing. So it would be better to make that list ahead of time. Another thing that I think is really helpful is then when you're looking at that list, and again, doing this a day or two before a writing session or a binge, if you want to call it that, would be to put a C and an E next to all of those tasks. And C means challenging and E means easier. And all that means is that which one is it going to be easier for you to knock out? Which one is going to take more thought? It might be more time consuming. You can decide what those categories are. But I found that making a list that has those categories is really helpful for me, because then at a glance, I can look and say, oh, I've got 5 things that are really challenging on this list. And then I've got 16 that are easier. And that helps me decide how I want to carve up my time. So you can use other phrases. I try not to use I try not to use words like difficult or hard, because a lot of times it's more that it's a little bit challenging or a little bit more time consuming, but it doesn't necessarily have to be difficult. And we don't want to think about writing in that way, if at all possible anyway. So another thing that I think is really helpful then is to determine how long you can write during your binge at a stretch before you need to take a break. So for me, on a normal day, if I was going to write all day on a Saturday, I know the very first time I would sit down and write, I could last 2 hours without a break, because that's the time of a normal writing session for me. I've talked before about how I write on weekdays, usually from 10 to 12 or 1 to 3 in the afternoon. And that's it. I don't write on the weekends. I don't write any more than that. I just try to get 10 hours a week. So I know I could do 2 hours, no problem. And so my first segment of the day, the writing day, might be a little bit longer. But then after that, I know I could probably only go an hour at a stretch, and then I'll need some breaks. So try to figure that out and divide up the time for the day. So figure out how that's going to work for you. I've noticed I can't sit as long, so that might be something that's the same for you. And I know a lot of us have now standing desks or treadmills or other things we're using to write. But I would factor that in, that the first 2 hours you're going to be a lot fresher and able to sit longer than you might be able to later in the day. So I would figure out how you could carve up those segments and when would be appropriate times to take a break for lunch or when you want to eat. And for those of you that are pulling an all-nighter, the same rules hold true. So just because you're starting it at 10 p.m. and you're going to try to go to like 10 a.m. the next day, you still need to figure out when you're going to stretch, when you're going to walk around, when you're going to take a break. And it's really up to you to determine how long those breaks might be. So some of you may be very refreshed after 15 minutes. Some of you may not be. I know when I did pull the all-nighter, my breaks were actually opening our front door and breathing in some icy cold winter air to wake myself up. So that's what I did. I did a little walking around and then I sat back down again. But it really just depends on how long the binge is and how long your writing session is. So you determine that. Okay. Other things that you might think about too is that where are you going to put those challenging tasks and those easier tasks in those segments? So I'm a big fan of knocking out a couple of challenging things first, because in my mind, maybe you've got a list of those 3 or 4 challenging things. If you can knock out 2 or 3 challenging things and that's all you get done in that long writing session, okay, that's great. Sometimes those are the things that move the writing forward a lot faster than other things you might be working on. So I would argue it's way more important to do a really solid rationale for your methodology and have a really good methods chapter that's thought out, where you've got the limitations explained, you have your actual methods explained, than fussing around with grammar for that time. So I would concern yourself with the tests that are a little bit more challenging, and if possible, try to knock those out earlier when you're fresher, and then you can do some of those easier tasks later as the day goes on, because it depends on how you are as a writer. Some of you may need some things to ease into writing. So if you say I would feel a lot better if I knocked off 2 easy tests just to get some momentum and then I got into a challenging thing, that could work for you. But if you don't have a preference, I would definitely start with a challenging thing, because you also want to have that relaxed feeling that I have all the rest of this writing time that I can work this out. So you don't feel the pressure of, oh, I only have 45 minutes left and my writing session is up and I never did that challenging thing. So that's really important. maybe the rule is to remember always to focus on whatever is going to give you forward progress. And then I would say, finally, I would make sure that when you are taking breaks during this time period, that these are real breaks. You actually are getting away from the computer. We all need, or if you're doing it, by pen and paper, same thing, standing up. We all need to not be focusing on screens. Obviously, with a Zoom, this is even more of a hazard. So, take a real break, go walk away from your computer, stand up. I think it's a great idea too, if you're in the middle of something interesting, if you set some timers, you might be doing a Pomodoro technique. I can put a link to that in the show notes if you don't know what that is. But if a timer goes off for you to take a break, write down where you were, leave a little, breadcrumb for you to come back to, but then take your real break and then come back refreshed. Um, so in closing, I would just say that, these are not ideal. You don't want to do these all the time, but once in a while, I would, argue they are necessary if you've got to get some writing done. So if you're planning to do some writing this weekend, or you have a long writing event in your near future, I would take these suggestions into consideration. One final thing, we always provide some bonus content. So in our show notes, I will also put some links into some playlists on Spotify. So there's a couple in there to pump you up for your writing, but I also have some in there for your actual writing session. So for me, I know music is a way that it kind of helps me break my segments up, where I have different playlists for different segments of the time. So hopefully these will help you, and happy writing this week.